So I finally found a house in Dallas with a shop space behind it that I am very excited to move into, but it does mean that I've been in a full-on painting and redoing baseboards and cleaning mode, as well as obviously moving everything. As I was going through things, I haven't put a video out in a while, and I wanted to touch on this motor right here, which is an old Mercury Mark 25. And a while back, I shot some footage of me taking it apart. I wasn't sure when I was going to get to it, but the more I've thought about it, this is a motor that I really want to restore. And when I get set up and get a little bit more time, I'm going to take the time to hopefully do it right, clean the motor up, clean the parts up that I can salvage, and then invest in the parts that I need to replace. So anyways, I'll let previous me take it away. This is the Afterwork Garage. I just picked this motor up for like 50 bucks, and I've already popped the other side of the cowl off here, you can see. And it is a beautiful old Merc 25, and I'm going to go ahead and take a look and see what condition it looks like it's in. I'd love to get it running again, but even if I can't, man, it's just such a cool looking motor. I want to have it around the shop just to look at. This cowl looks like it's not super easy to get off. There was one bolt here holding on this plate, which covered the front section. And then there were two screws here, only one of which existed, which screw into here, and then a bolt in the back you take out and you can separate this half off, but to get the other side off, it looks like you got to take off this bolt, that bolt there, and this bolt in here. And then, you know, we might as well take the top off, which we're going to need to do anyways. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. I just finished getting the other side of the cowl off. As you can see, I took the top off as well, and the top has the recoil starter in it, and in this case, this recoil start is definitely no good. You can pull it out and it doesn't recoil back in again. Looks like there's a screw on the top that we'll deal with later to get that back and working. But for now, I'm going to set this down sort of out of the way. The other half of the cowl goes here. It's held on by these bolts, which again are kind of annoying to get off. So, you know, be ready to use wrenches and extensions and things. Moving over to the engine here, there's some immediate problems that I see. First of which is the flywheel appears to be seized, so the motor does not want to move. We'll look into that. Second is, it looks like the flywheel here was rubbing on our spark plug leads. Again, not a big problem. We can tie those up out of the way once we get this motor back together. Looks pretty simple. Nothing crazy. We've got our carburetor here, looks small, and again, you know, it's funny. This motor over here, which I'm waiting on a parts kit to come in so I can get it back together, had the same side bowl carb on it. This one doesn't have the back drag, but it has this side bowl to it, and it does look a lot smaller though. And obviously we have our little manual choke lever here. Come on, there we go. Mercury style quick connects. The same thing I broke off on the 82 40 horsepower. So that's going to go to our fuel pump right here and send things off to our fuel filter and then the carburetor. On this side we have the water gallery here, and I believe this is an exhaust here on this side. And on the other side, these two little plates cover where the intake goes in, pushes in like that. So I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the spark plugs out and maybe take these little ports off so I can take a look at how everything looks inside. And, you know, get some penetrating oil in there, see if I can't start to rock it back and forth and work the engine loose naturally on its own. But if it's, you know, if it's bad as it might seem and it's all rusty inside, we might end up taking this apart. But this motor is just so beautiful. Look at that. How cool is this thing? Look at that big old two-bladed prop on there. Now, when I bought it, the guy did point out that the lower unit was cracked and badly welded back on, and you can see that weld has cracked again. So it looks like, you know, someone actually did a decent job welding it there. They just didn't, I don't think, grind out how they should have. And it's naturally a weak spot with those intake holes. So we're going to have to chase down either a lower unit housing, which is going to be super expensive, or try to get this fixed somehow, although, you know, twice, 3 times, 4 times repaired is probably not the best policy. But we'll see what the cards have in store for this particular motor. Woof. Look at that. This is not good. This is not what you want to see. So these little things deflect air up from the crankcase and into the intake ports. And there is all sorts of crumbs and like weird stuff in there. I don't even know what we're looking at, honestly. But it does not look good. It doesn't look clean. These things should be clean and oily from gasoline. This has not had gasoline through it in a long time. So I have a strong suspicion we're going to have to take the whole thing apart and rebuild it, which, again, for this motor, I think it's going to be cool. I'm going to see how available parts are. Again, this is a Mercury Mark 25. I haven't gotten a chance to look up the serial number on it to see what year it is, but your serial number, obviously is right there. We'll see. Let's keep going. Bottom plug looks, brown and actually like it should, which is weird. Gross, the intake of this engine looks. Top plug looks oily. Looks not very used. This might have been replaced. I just don't know. But they look different, so not a great sign. The throttle actually works, and the spark advance seems to work, and the throttle body is opening up. So come over here and see what I see. That is rust. All right, again, it looks like we have 6 bolts holding the block to the leg. 3 on this side and 3 on this side, and they look like they're 11 millimeter, maybe, or 7/16 rather. A standard motor. Yeah, they're gonna be 7/16. First things first, before I take the last bolts off, I'm gonna pull the flywheel. I'm gonna pull off the carburetor, and I think I'm gonna separate the throttle linkage right here. Although actually it's bolted to the block here too, isn't it? And this is in the way. So would I have to take this all the way off too? Of course the answer is yes. Let's do the fuel system first. I think that's going to be the easiest. I should note here, one of these, this one, is shorter than these two. It's pretty obvious by the case here, but let's remember that. These things don't look like they come off all the way with the carburetor on, so we're going to have to back them off little by little in typical annoying Mercury fashion. I'm starting to think they do this on purpose as a joke. I have to realize their service techs have to work on them too. But these angles are ridiculous. Some of these angles just give you no room. I guess they want you thinking. They want you to take time and say, you sure you want to take this bolt off? Go ahead and break this fuel pump loose. Surprisingly intact, but look how stiff that is. It's supposed to be kind of rubbery. And the hole again is full of crap. So something's going on in this crankcase. I'll tell you. See, this is the kind of stuff you find all over these motors. I want to get these 2 bolts out. There's a bolt here and a bolt there. Except that bolt is covered by this nut and bolt right here. So I have to take this off, and to get this off I have to take this whole metal thing off with another nut back there. But before we do any of that, let's get the flywheel off. The eternal quest for bolts that fit. Not having the correct bolts to pull the flywheel on hand, I continued disassembly by removing what appeared to be the steering bar and the throttle linkage. Alright, we've isolated the throttle linkage from the motor. Last thing we need to do is this flywheel. Alright, I went out and I bought some bolts that fit these holes. These are 1/4 by 20 or 20 threads per inch on these holes. While I was in the Lowe's parking lot, I did a little research and found that this is a 1955 Mark 25, and despite the name, it's actually about 18 horsepower. This seems like a big flywheel, doesn't it? That's like super beefy. Everything about this engine is beefy. It's pretty heavy for its size, partly due to the cowl, which is all aluminum. Okay, so it looks like these coils are not good. They're all cracked and whatnot. We've got these little screws here, big screws here. Since they all rotate together, I don't think the big screws are what's holding it down. But I'm thinking if I take this plate off, I can see what's under here and potentially figure out what I'm doing. Here's our points. It's a retainer plate or something. I think I have to undo these screws. So there's 4 screws that you have to undo down at the bottom of this plate that holds it to like a retainer thing down here. And it looks like with those undone, you should be able to slide this up. Okay, this plate fell down on this side. There is a bolt still in the way here. And I've lost our ability to turn around in a circle. Oh, please turn back. Alright, so there would be an easier way to do this if I had positioned this bolt in a way that I could get to it before I jammed this all up. Well, all this is falling apart down here, and I'm sure I need to keep the right orientation of all of these things, and I just didn't. So we have all these plates. I'm gonna have to figure out how they all go back together. Hey, there we go. Try to keep this all together. This unit comes off. There's a bolt that bolts into the head. I went ahead and took off the rest of the nuts holding the power head to the leg. Now we're just going to try to separate this power head from, oh, is it already coming? We're not going to need, I thought we were going to need a lot more persuasion than this. Oh, that's perfect, okay. Didn't even have to take the lower unit off. We're just going to lift this straight up off of the drive shaft. Yuck. That's crusty. We can get a look down at the leg there, and you can see this buildup of oil from the exhaust. Alright, right away looking at this engine, that's what we saw earlier, all that crap and crud in there. It's rolling around and coming out on the bench. That shouldn't be like that in our intake ports. I'm going to go ahead and just tear this engine down. We're going to see what we got. Look at this. This is, I don't know if that's a factory seal. That may be an original factory Merc seal just to show that this engine's never been apart. Yes, I feel a little bad breaking this. Yes, it clearly needs to come apart. This block serial number matches the serial number on the motor, so it's all original there. Oh, that's not a good sign. Look at that. That screw head just popped right off. Broke right off. Even a little tiny ratchet too. That's just all corrosion. This one too. Snapped right off. Yeah, little aluminum screws. Well, that would be the reason those heads snapped off. We'll have to get those out of the block, which is annoying. Uh-oh. Just gonna twist off? Okay, we're being very careful. I got it. Those other ones, I feel like I didn't put much force into it, and they just popped right out of there. Okay. This plate is hot, it got real hot, and it got real warped. So, not good. That's bad. Oh, we have pretty bad scoring on the pistons on that side. And look at that. Just hunk of chunk. Okay. So, obviously this is going to take some cleaning up, this motor. It's been run hot a lot. Oh. Oh no. No, it snapped off. I'm using the little rat. This is like, I use this on these and nothing happens. I use the little ratchet and snap it off. You know, that hammering action does actually help. I just can't fit the impact socket in there. Just look how rusty and crusty that is though. Can you see that? That's why they're snapping. So here's our bolt pattern. They should have been all the same size originally. Missing that one, snapped, snapped, and snapped. Found my nudger. Look at those broken bolts in there, although at least there's stuff sticking out. I'm really happy about that actually, because I can heat this up, penetrating oil, and pull them out. Nature's Loctite, rust. Oh, I'm such an idiot. You know, it helps if you take all the bolts off before you try to jam on it. I'm going to be careful. I'm kind of pushing on this bolt. Oh, it's helping separate them. That's great. I wonder if they did that on purpose. They made this inconvenient clearance here so that it helps push the blocks apart. Okay. Glad I put some of that penetrating oil in there earlier. There we go. Oh, there we go. Coming. She's coming. And that has a big rust ring in it and some, some rust damage. On the sides, pistons are scored pretty badly, actually. Look at that, it's starting to melt there. Rings are free. Look at that. Kind of crazy. When I initially looked through the intake ports, this is all I saw. I could see the rings looked like they might be free, and it didn't look very scored. Look over here on the exhaust side, and that's a different story. The bigger problem, which you might be able to tell, and actually is the reason why this engine appears to be seized up, is the crankshaft is totally rusted. That is no bueno. That's an issue. So maybe it's just these two bolts, because then these studs go all the way through and are held on with different bolts or nuts. Just gonna come off. These all appear to be the same. They're all 7/16 bolts, or about 11 mils. Oh, this piston's flopping around. This doesn't feel right. Something doesn't feel right about them. I know they're in terrible shape, but this doesn't seem right doing this. It's starting to come. It's coming. Usually once you get past the tension of the gasket holding it on, and then sometimes there's a seal in here. But man, this is like a fight all the way. And I don't want to apply too much pressure. I'm applying a lot of pressure, but not like, pry bar levels of pressure. It's kind of why I'm using a screwdriver. Oh, there we go. Corrosion, corrosion, corrosion. Have you ever seen a bearing that looks like that? Look at that bearing. It's not going to spin. And interestingly, this crankshaft does slide out of this very corroded board. And we have this stupid reed valve, interior reed valve assembly too. Again, tear down like this always makes me feel weird, because I want to not do that much damage. But when you have parts that look like this, it's like, I'm going to have to replace all of this. Pin is not as stuck. Still basically ruined. All of our little guys in here will need to be replaced. Normally you could rotate this crankshaft to make these things easier to get to. This is just not possible here. These have needle bearings. A lot of times the newer engines will have two cages with roller bearings in it. It looks like we have needle bearings in here on these rod ends. I would stamp these or something, but A, don't have access, and B, it might be a moot point there, because rod bearings are not typically, or rods are not like this to separate. Really just come apart. It's so rusty I can't even get a socket to stay on there properly. I'm going to tap on those cap bolts. Hey, here we are. Even rustier and nastier. I don't know if these are even worth saving, but interestingly, these caps aren't fractured. So normally caps are made as one piece, and then there's a little filed weak point groove in there, and then they're fractured. These caps are ground on the ends, which is Interesting.
To remove the crankshaft of this motor, you have to slide it down and out of the block. This is different than the two-piece crankcases you see on most modern two-strokes, which split apart to let the crankshaft out. This also wasn't aided by the fact that the crank was completely seized in place. Without oil, steel and aluminum definitely don't play nice together.
At this point, I think PB Power Blast is kind of like peeing on a wildfire, but you never know. So the really corroded part is that reed valve block in there. That's real stuck in there, so that all has to slide out with the crankshaft. It sits about here, so I'm just going to heat this area a little bit. Give it a little bit of, warm it up. Warm up all that corrosion. Maybe let it expand a touch. I bet that bolt holds in the block. Maybe it did. Maybe it did nothing. Definitely ruined whatever that was. The crankshaft itself is like rusted in there, and you can see that reed assembly. The reed valves are right here, or what's left of them. Reed stops there. Yeah. Well, I'd say that's ready to slap back together and put on the water, don't you?
As you can see, I ended up using quite a bit of force to get it out, both rotationally with an impact to initially break it free, and then with a hammer to coax it out of the block. This does make me worry about bending or damaging the crank, but in general, cranks are pretty durable, and if I end up having to track down a new one, I'll cross that bridge when I come to it.
Alright, we have our crankshaft out, and we have a very corroded block, but actually, I think this is probably clean upable. It'll obviously need new bearing in there, and new gaskets, but there's not like cracks. I didn't ruin it getting the crankshaft out. Crankshaft itself, it's a crankshaft, it's rusty, which isn't good, but the journals look good. Look at that. There's like no scoring, it's dirty. I'll clean it up for you. Now this reed block is just a disaster. I might be in trouble because I looked for the reed block like this for the 1982 Mercury, and they were no longer in production. There's two Phillips head screws, it looks like, down in there. Let's go ahead and undo those wherever my screwdriver is. Well, there's dowels, two little alignment dowels. But, surprise, I'd assume there's a bearing in there, but there's needle bearings in here. More of them. Those marks show that this motor was sitting with water, and so it rusted where the needle bearings were contacting it. That is, it's more pronounced here. This is on a bearing race. If you see that, you can assume that it was sitting. It's not always super pronounced like this because this is just so bad. Well, I'm gonna see if I can get my hands on another one of these. It looks like there's a V pattern. It's kind of hard to see here on these reed valves. So like a boomerang looking reed valves with one there, one there, one there, one there. It's interesting, you can compare those to the reed valves out of the 1982 Mercury 40 horsepower, where the reed valve stops are these florets, and then the reed valves are also little pedal-shaped slivers of metal. On the inside, you have a labyrinth seal instead of the needle bearings, and you still have the same alignment dowels, it looks like, in the same positions. This one's going to be a while, though, before we get it cleaned up. This is going to be when I have some free time. I'm just going to start cleaning parts up. I'm going to be searching for parts like this reed valve block, looking for other parts like bearings, things that I need, and then slowly gathering parts and seeing about honing or machining things that might need to be redone. So I'm guessing what happened is water got into the intake here, in through the carb, and obviously rusted out the reed valve assembly the worst, and then got into the crankcase through there and started rusting everything else out. But interestingly, even a quick wipe down on these rod journals makes them look not so bad. And again, I literally just wiped this down. No solvent, no nothing, no polishing. But you can see that. They don't look terrible. So I'll have to see if all my hammering distorted anything. I doubt it, because these cranks are really hard. Crankshafts usually shatter, they don't bend because they're hardened. Maybe just a tiny little bit of pitting there. The journal chamfers are nice here and nice here. Obviously, you know, again, we have issues here. This is going to need to be polished, but I honestly think that can be polished out. That doesn't need to be remachined. It's not like it grenaded or blew up. There we go. There's the major damage right there. It's scoring. And again, major damage right there. Funny though, for these old two-strokes, you know, an engine, if it wasn't for all that rust, an engine would run like this. And I almost bet you if I cleaned the carb up, you know, I broke it free with that impact to get the bearings free on the other one, I bet this engine would actually start. Just because they're such tanks, they have such high tolerances for large tolerances. I definitely have some work ahead of me with this motor, but I think it's going to be a fun rebuild. Looking, you know, barring complete absence of availability of parts and, you know, maybe like a bad crankshaft or something that I just can't get over, then it'll become a wall hanger, unfortunately. But barring that, I think we stand up potentially a chance at getting this thing back and going. Just a fair warning that it may be a little bit of time before I get this motor back together and get some video shot on it, but it's one that I'd really like to take the time to do right. So hopefully it's going to be worth the wait for you guys and worth the wait for me. So keep this motor in the back of your minds. We're hopefully going to see more of it. But until then, I hope you enjoyed the video, and I will catch you next time on the After Work Garage.